Okay, so welcome everybody to the next panel on new voices. It's a panel that looks at female artists, researchers, designers who are breaking new grounds in their work. It's not a particular background, it's the presentations we will hear today are more focused on specific artistic practices and expressions. I just want, in my introduction, give a little bit of a feminist background after all. My name is Sabine Himmelsbach and I'm the director of HEC, House of Electronic Arts in Basel. It's an institution focusing on digital culture and the arts of the information age. And within our program, we also try to focus and feature young upcoming female artists and designers. I think it's great that Mapping Festival has put together this panel to present works of women in the field of art, science and technology who are continuously breaking new grounds, as I said, and by doing what they are doing, become role models for new generations of female artists and researchers. With their practice, they will change cultural attitudes and transform stereotypes. When the media art pioneer Lynn Hirschman premiered her film War, Women Art Revolution a couple of years ago, it was painful to see how female artists have been ignored for decades, and it revealed also how the feminist art movement fused free speech and politics into an art that radically transformed the art and cultures of our time. And the film really spread on pioneering artists from the 60s as Judy Chicago or Nancy Spiro, up to a younger generation like Miranda July. Many things have changed for the better meanwhile, but we are still fighting for gender equalities in many ways. For example, just recently in the media, the discussion on wages, that women earn less for the same work that they're doing. And last year's social campaign, #KissMyArse, that has been mentioned by Regine Debatier this morning already, was initiated by young artists Heather Dewey Hagborg, Adi Wagenknecht, Camilla Mark Rostwick and Casey High, and they criticized the fact that over 90% of the Golden Nika winners, the prestigious award of the Ars Electronica Festival, are male, and also internationally acclaimed female artists had applied in the 29-year history of the festival. And we also heard this morning that obviously this campaign has started to change things to the better as well. Heather Dewey Hagborg claims, quote, "As women in art and tech, we are consistently under-recognized, underfunded and written out of history," end quote. So still a long way to go regarding a feminist future. And I would like to quote the British-Australian scholar Sarah Ahmed when she says, quote, "Perhaps when we think about the question of feminist futures, we need to attend to the legacies of feminist pasts in order to think through the very question of what it would mean to have a world where feminism as a politics of transformation is no longer necessary." On this panel, we are going to hear presentations by amazing designers and artists, Edwina Portocarrero and Felicie Destiendorf. I'm sure I mispronounced it, so please excuse that. Unfortunately, the artist and researcher Joanna Moll has become ill and had to cancel her participation a couple of days ago. It's a pity that we cannot hear her perspective, which would have been quite interested as a researcher discussing the role of the internet by shaping our social realities. So bear with me as I'm stepping in with the presentation myself, sort of very last minute. And I have decided that I will speak about a young American artist, Adi Wagenknecht, where we had staged a solo show of her work at HEC last year, titled Liminal Laws. And I think in the context of this panel, she is a very interesting figure. And I would like to start with giving her a couple of minutes by showing a short clip. But maybe also just having one more note. I hope I'm still connected. Yes. Just a second. So that's more like a general intro. That's a presentation she gave at Deep Lab. She's the founder of Deep Lab, a congress of cyber-feminist researchers to examine how the themes of privacy, security, surveillance, anonymity, and large-scale data aggregation are problematized in the arts, culture, and society. And she says herself, and why she founded Deep Lab, quote, "The web is largely void of a female presence. Save for sexualized images, female hackers must engage with the future in order to make our presence in history indelible." And so Deep Lab was born. And here she speaks about her artistic practice, and I think very bravely showing what the challenges a young female artist has to deal with. Just a minute.
Invited me to return to the studio, and I was more or less where I am today at the realization that it's not about equal rights, but how we as women think, how we teach and treat each other. We have to reshape our own perception of how we view ourselves. A good friend once gave me the advice that for every woman that supports and mentors you, support 3 more women. The struggle at this moment for me is about coming to a new understanding of how things really are. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's about getting out of a fantasy, about expectations ingrained by media and seeing the facts. As an artist and a technologist, we have to fight against the preconceived notions and biases that, as the Guerrilla Girls so aptly stated in the 90s, less than 3% of the artists in the Met are women, but over 85% of the nudes are female. We have a long way to go. So flash forward, Michael Brown, an unarmed black teenager, was
Okay, so here she talks more about the general political situation in the US, so I'm skipping that and going back. Sorry. All right. Thanks. Wagenknecht belongs to a new generation of artists that merges a technological skill and free hacker spirit with a prolific conceptual creative output. Her work moves from installation to internet and back, from painting to pirate and beyond, bringing themes and thoughts together that reflect several of the most urgent socio-critical topics of the moment. Wagenknecht's work is both sensual and poetic, but never loses its political strain. It is rich and varied, ranging from sculptures and interactive installations to painting, prints, video, and online work. And in almost every work she has created over the past years, you can find reflections on in- and exclusions by technical and societal systems. And despite the often ostensible beauty and sometimes light-hearted humor of the final artworks, there's also a kind of unease in them, which makes the audience feel the need to reflect critically with her, especially on the influence of media technologies on society. The exhibition Liminal Laws brings together 5 years of her work and is also her first big solo show, or was her first big solo show in Europe. The project has been a collaboration between MU in Eindhoven in the Netherlands and HEC, House of Electronic Arts in Basel. Jointly, we commissioned Wagenknecht to develop several new works, which were also co-produced by both institutions. The title refers to thresholds, boundaries, and transitions. Laws are made by definition to produce clarity and define borders. But the liminal also encompasses the gray areas in which things are not fully defined yet. In the exhibition, Wagenknecht addresses the permeability of laws and limits. She critically questions for whom laws apply, whom they protect and whom they ignore. This may relate to access to technology, but also refers to the role of women in society, as well as on the situation of refugees, surveillance technologies, or on the internet itself as a comprehensive cultural system. Subtly, through aesthetic and poetic installations, the artist creates a confrontation with the accessibility to technology and to the internet. Adi Wagenknecht identifies a crisis of intimacy. Hence, liminal laws addresses not only boundaries, but also the increasing tension and absence of human experience in our society, in which our interactions increasingly take place with computers and smartphones rather than with our fellow human beings. Or let me put it in Adi's own words, quote, "Borders lend themselves to conflict and definitions. Borders are often presented in a way that they remain invisible and until there's a glitch which manifests them in a quantifiable way, revealing some or all of their mass and at the same time making way for a vulnerability which lets us in. This can be applied to gender, women's role in society, as much as it can be applied to refugees, the internet, and larger cultural systems. As Malvin Kranzberg says, technology is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral. We have invested machines with our ultimate desires, and we are becoming a society which is more and more confessional to hardware than to each other. Google knows more about you than your wife or anyone else. We look into computer windows for the vast majority of the day and rarely look out of the real window next to us. This exhibition serves as a critique as much as it is an acceptance of our cultural love affair with the online," end quote. So let me present some of the works from the exhibition and maybe start with the key visual that you see here for a while. A bunch of flowers held together by computer cables. Adi came up with that idea for key visual that addresses the idea of the show in a very loose and abstract way, but also addressing the notion of the female artist in a male-connoted tech environment. When entering the exhibition, the visitors were confronted with a series of glass panels suspended from the ceiling. The series of works, titled Glass Ceiling, refers to the eponymous English language metaphor which was coined in the 1980s. It bluntly addresses the depressing reality that stereotypical gender roles have an influence on women's career opportunities. The glass ceiling blocks women from advancing to influential positions on the career ladder. And I'm showing you here two images of the performance she did on the opening day, smashing the glass panels with a brick, throwing roses against them, and so on. Wagenknecht makes these invisible boundaries visible. The arsenal that women in our society are left with leaves traces on a bulletproof glass. Criticism, sex, and violence are double-edged swords that can injure the assailant as much as the victim. The fact that not a single scratch is left on the panes of bulletproof glass graphically expresses women's failure and feelings of anger and powerlessness. The struggle seems hopeless, but the consequence should never be to simply give up. Adi elaborates on her understanding of the glass panel within her work, quote, "The glass panels are a narrative on third-wave feminism and the role which women are expected to play, which culturally bars us from freedom and expression. This new set of rules often keeps us contained to domestic roles, even when we have it all. This rarely equates to equality in the domestic space. Sheryl Sandberg, who advocates equality for women in Western worlds, still admits she does the majority of the work in the home. We still have a long way to go, ladies," end quote. Placed at the entrance of the exhibition, the work defined the background or starting position for Adi's work in general. The central piece of the show was While You Were Sleeping, a sculptural object modeled after the shape of a drone. The work refers to a symbol of our day, the drone as an unmanned flying object used as a mobile monitoring device in places such as the USA, Yemen, the Middle East, or parts of Eastern Europe, and of course here as well. The technical object gives no obvious indication of its intentions, let alone of its actions. Held down by network cables, Wagenknecht's simulated drone clearly demonstrates its latent potential for action. Because the artist shows the anonymous and obscure object in its full size, she confronts us with the actual purpose, spying and potential killing on behalf of political interests. With her installation, Wagenknecht counteracts the empty description of an apparently safe and clean military technology which manages to escape human responsibility. In Liberator gun vases, vase-like objects made of synthetic stand on 3 pedestals. These vases are formed from 3D prints of so-called liberators, the first 3D modeled handguns, which were programmed as an open source code and whose instructions are available to be downloaded online for free. By distorting, misappropriating, and recombining the prints, the artist neutralizes all reference to the firearm. The resulting artifacts transform symbols of violence into monochromatic objects. They demonstrate that technology, as you heard, is never neutral and can be used one way or another. You can print a vase or you can print the handgun. At the same time, they remind us of every individual's decision-making power. Black Hawk Powder is a series of action painting, and you saw it before in the overall setting of the exhibition, that Wagenknecht began in 2007 and continues to extend. Instead of a brush, the artist uses a miniature drone controlled through simple flight control commands such as barrel roll, take off, and land. The work combines opposites, colorful aesthetics on one hand and threatening subject matter on the other. The latter is embodied by the drones, which are used mainly in surveillance technology. Among the most recent paintings in the series are these works on paper, which integrate heat and UV-sensitive pigments and thus augment the early experiments with liquid acrylics on canvas. In Internet of Things, Wagenknecht modified 3 Roomba robotic vacuum cleaners to function as a Wi-Fi hotspot, a Wi-Fi jammer, and the node to the Tor browser. Thanks to an algorithm that initiates the Roomba's cleaning function, an interaction arises from the original practical functionality that is dynamic but simultaneously disruptive. Depending on the Roomba's distance from one another, and also from mobile phones, laptops, or other wireless routers, the technology of these devices is influenced and their signals are either amplified or suppressed. Internet of Things comments on the unpredictability of objects' interactions in the net. In their random dance, the robots release themselves from their invisible mutual embrace and continue on their way, steered in other directions only in response to obstacles. The objects placed on the robots, whether potted plants or lifestyle choices or healing crystals, refer to the title, which is already a reality and not only in our office spaces. This Internet of Things acts independently and communicates internally in our technological devices today. Here are the Black Hawk Powder images, how they have been suspended in the space. Some more. The last example I would like to show is BRBXOXO, a work that Adi made in collaboration with Pablo Garcia. In a playful satire of our viewing habits and stereotypes, BRBXOXO which stands for Be Right Back, Kisses and Hugs, searches through sexcam websites and shows only those feeds in which the performers are missing. The screen becomes a window, and the absence of the actors inevitably raises the questions of their whereabouts, which in turn brings their humanity to the fore. At the same time, while waiting, the viewer is thrown back on his or her own resources. It's only a couple of minutes, so I think we have time to... And just a couple more images. During the course of the show, we also invited Adi to several talks and workshops. Here with students doing a guided tour through the exhibition. Here a very playful workshop that she gave on drone painting. So where we had this, it was actually liquid on paper material, and then the drones were diving into that liquid and spreading it around. And then also very important, she did several workshops on the issue of encryption and the dark web. It was an amazing experience for me to work with Adi, and I hope that it was also inspiring for the topic of our panel. That's so far from my side, and now I'm happy to hand over to Felicie, and I would like to introduce her briefly. Felicie is a Greek-born artist that lives and works in Paris. Her work explores the meaning and impact of light by combining light sculpture and computer programming. Manipulating video light as a painting, the artist projects and inflects it on sculptures. She created her first video mapping pieces in 2000 and used physical material, still lifes and folded papers as reflectors on which she casts illusions of shadows or color shadings as actors trompe-l'oeil. Her research focuses on the question and process of vision and the conditioning of views. Her immersive installations use a phenomenological approach to reality and perception of time and space. They underscore the perception of time as a continuum. Since 2014, her artistic research focuses on space in relation to astrophysics as well, and to study the natural light cycles. She collaborates with experimental and electronic music artists, thereby opening another dimension in her research and perception by adding sound to her artworks. Physical experience and interaction are inherent to her creative process, in which she involves the viewer's own body in relation to the artwork. With this kinetic characteristics, the object art triggers cognitive engagement, and I'm excited to hear your presentation for today. Thank you. So now I hope that's okay to switch to that computer, and while we're doing that, I would like to introduce Edwina Portocarrero. Edwina is a Mexican designer. She has studied design and production with a focus on lighting and set design at CalArts in Los Angeles. She has traveled extensively from Nicaragua, Honduras, or Rwanda. She's lived in Brazil, working at a documentary production house or as a lighting designer in her native Mexico. Since 2009, she has been working at the prestigious MIT Media Lab. There she designs hybrid physical and digital objects and systems for play, education, and performance, blending the evocative and intimate qualities of objects and object interaction with the affordances of digital systems. Living between analog and digital, handcrafted and mass-produced, her work explores the ways in which objects and materials mediate and augment experience across contexts and cultures. During her time at the MIT Media Lab, she has invented co-invented a drawing application that can connect two children at opposite ends of the world and a dream recording pillow. Today, she's working on the playgrounds of the future and explores how telepresence, calm technology, and transformable architecture can inform the design of network playscapes, and that is also the topic she's talking about today. Welcome.
Thank you. You did homework. What I said was pretty brief. Thank you, Carmen, for inviting me. It's not my typical audience. Usually I'm at human-computer interaction conferences and things of the sort, so it's kind of nice to have this perspective and this very much needed critique from you. Very welcome whenever. So I'm at the Media Lab, which is good and bad. We live in a really nice little bubble that allows us to explore themes that we had never explored before, at least in my personal case. As I said, I came from CalArts doing lighting and set design. But it's also kind of challenging because at one point we have to break into the real world, and the real world has nothing to do with the permissiveness that the lab can give us. As she mentioned, for my master's, I was interested in connecting distance. I'm from Mexico City. I left when I was 18. I'm one out of 5 children, so I kind of was raised by a pack of wolves, and I think this very much has informed my work. When I came into the lab and I did my master's and then I got into the PhD, I thought about continuing the line of light and set design, but I really did not want to work in theater per se. So I was trying to see what other spaces for creating spaces that had no real purpose were there, and that's where playgrounds came about. And I also thought playgrounds were really great at being kind of the center of a cross points between urban planning, architecture, cognitive development, etc., etc. And especially now that smart cities are supposed to be the new thing coming up, and that most of the population supposedly will be urban by 2050. I was concerned about what role the public space might play for children if we don't integrate them from now, and if we don't take play seriously as something that helps us learn and connect. So when you Google playgrounds, this is what you see, right? You see the same thing over and over and over again, which is this kind of very iconography loaded, like plastic kits of castles and slides, and it's kind of the same thing. And I bet for anybody that's over 30 maybe, if I ask you about how you used to play, the story will be very different, and mostly these will not take part in your recollection of infancy. So first of all, I'm a bit concerned that that's kind of the design language that we're using for play in the urban space. So I'm attempting to try to change that somehow, not myself, but by trying to make it more open for many people to create. As we know, play comes before space. I really like this painting by Bruegel. It shows how play happens no matter what, or what you give people. And this is just an illustration that a friend of mine did when I tried to explain to him what I was trying to do in Mexico City. And I just really liked it, so I think I should share it. So basically, Miguel Sicard in his Play Matters book kind of coined this, which very much exemplifies what I'm trying to do somehow. And so usually at the lab, you do your master's and your PhD, and you do an experiment, and you do it within the confines of the lab, and rarely do you actually go into the real world to see what happens. The new director of the lab, Joito, has this new, the lab started with a publish or perish motto, then it went to demo or die, and now it has a demo or deploy or die. My new motto is deploy and die, because it's actually pretty hard to do it, and I'm kind of one of the first people at the lab to venture out. And I don't think I would have done it out of my own will, but it was an invitation from the government of Mexico City to try to come and explore what ludic interaction in public space might be. So after not living in my native Mexico City for about, I don't know, almost 20 years, 15 years, I came back thinking that I knew where I was, but 15 years a city, especially like Mexico City, changes quite a bit. And well, it's a monster city. For those of you who have been there, I think that you can attest to my to my recollections. But it's a huge city with a lot of people and a lot of. One of the problems that I think attains Mexico City the most is problems of marginalization and segregation. You can be in one neighborhood and cross the avenue, and you're in a completely different neighborhood, and it's very racial. It's really strange. So my first question with Networks Playscapes was what is it that already networks the city, beyond what I can do or what cannot do? And one of the things that I think it's prevalent all over is these tricycles that are used for, how do you say it, irregular commerce, basically. For casual commerce, these tricycles sell anything from water, coconuts, tamales, bread, everything. And each seller has its own call, so its own merolico, it's called. So if you are from Mexico City, these are kind of embedded in your DNA. You hear that whistle, and you know that it's somebody coming to sharpen your knives. You hear that call, and you know that it's a gas person. And they go through the fanciest neighborhoods and through the lowest neighborhoods. Lowest is not a nice word to use, but to the poorest neighborhoods, I guess. And food is one of the things that everybody gathers around. So these tricycles somehow connect the neighborhood in neighborhoods in a way that I think nobody is really aware, but they actually do, and do quite a bit. So the first thing that I did was buy one of these tricycles and hack it up a little bit and put a roof and take it out on the streets. And I chose 3 different areas of Mexico City. One is Colonia Roma, which is very hip right now. Roma is next to Doctores. So it was Roma and Doctores, then San Miguel Chapultepec and Daniel Garza, and the third one was Polanco and Pensil. Polanco is also one of the richest neighborhoods, and Pensil is one of the not richest neighborhoods at all in the city. So the first experiment was just to put a roll of paper on the tricycle and to start doing some sort of exquisite corpses between these 2 neighborhoods. So, I would pedal it around one neighborhood, specific points, outside tortillerias or, fondas and plazas, parks, schools, and then go to the other neighborhood and kind of just continue the dialogue back and forth and back and forth and back and forth for a week and see what would happen. And part of the premise of choosing paper and written word was because I was actually interested in seeing how people wrote, to see the spelling, the grammar, the calligraphy, etc., etc. And it was interesting because in outside schools where children and teenagers were, they were writing emojis down. I was getting X's and D's and for a little face, and it took me a while to try to transcribe what this kind of third translation meant. it was mostly a challenge for me, you know, like writing one of these things in the street is not an easy task at all. I was also pretty shy, you know, like trying to get people to come around to do something and to activate a space is something that I had not done before. So slowly but steadily, I tried to, you know, make myself present, and that was done with the help of like designing posters and putting them on the streets, and actually designing a song that would, my own Merolico, that would like alert people that this thing was coming. And it was nice also to see the expectation from the people in the other neighborhood, from both neighborhoods, to see the tricycle come back and see what had been written in response to whatever they had sent out. The work was supported by Museo Tamayo, which was very helpful, providing a space to work at and a platform. And I mentioned that because, as I said, like I started working with government, which had a huge load of complications that were it was pretty surprising, because instead of it being an enabling force, it became very much the opposite, to the point that I had to kind of run away from trying to do things with government, and then got kind of invited by this like gigantic public institution, which is Museo Tamayo, a very important museum in Mexico City, which was not free of its own hardships, and they were coming from places that I would have not imagined. Yeah, anyway, I can expand on that a little bit later. I think this is a video, maybe. I don't know. Well, oh yeah. I don't have audio. I think you have the audio. And the work was done with a lot of people that helped out. You know, where I bought the tricycle was in La Merced, which is a pretty rowdy neighborhood downtown. And when I was painting the tricycle outside of Museo Tamayo, one of the guards was really interested in it, and he was like, "Do you have a song? Can I make the song for you?" And I was like, "Are you kidding me? I totally need a song, and I would love you to make the song." So he made the song himself, and it's very poor audio because he recorded on his cell phone, and then he sent it to me, and
Vengan, vengan, niñas y señoras, borrachitos, abogados, policías y ladrones, niñas, fresas, helados, sorpresas, acérquense, acérquense a escribir en este su triciclo de la doctores, a la Roma, de la Roma a la doctores, pensil a la Polanco, de Polanco a la pensil. ¿Qué te dicen? ¿Qué les dicen? Vengan, vengan, salgan a escribir sin querer, queriendo a decir, vengan, vengan.
And as soon as he made the song, then another person wanted to make the song, which like then the Merolico kind of kept on changing according to each neighborhood. And also the guy, so the Merolico guy is the guard, and then next to him it's another guy. Both of them are named Jaime for some reason. Jaime sells ice creams outside of the museum. And he also, like, he pedals a tricycle, so he gave me all the, you know, he trained me on how to pedal one of these tricycles properly, because he knew that I was going to break my face if I didn't get properly trained before. And ultimately, he like got his son to help me out pedal it, because it was not an easy task to do this thing. So that's kind of like just exemplifying the difference that you get when you cross the avenue. So yeah, so that's Doctores and Roma, and that's kind of the points where we stopped. It was also nice to see the posters kind of decomposing on the street as I went along. It's also a video. So this is Alejandro and I. This is in Colonia Doctores. Colonia Doctores is, it's a tough neighborhood. It's where many of the government buildings are. Yeah, children go crazy. It's kind of nice. But you know, next to the children, there's this building where it's like the Mexico City's morgue, where like all the people that have died that don't have anybody to recognize them, like end up being. And then there is also the biggest like tribunal home where people are waiting for like cases. So it's a dark neighborhood. Like the aura of the neighborhood is pretty dark. So to get this contrast between like what a kid might say and being read by someone that's waiting for their trial outside the place, like it's, yeah. It becomes a good dialogue. So then whatever was written was exposed like outside in the public space so that people could read it, and I tried to always make it in like places that were kind of in the border between both neighborhoods so that they could access it without, having any issues. This is outside of Archivo, Arquitectura y Diseño, which is a gallery also that was really helpful in helping me out. Make things happen. And then another thing that was interesting is that then people wanted to ride the tricycle. So it had like a different, a third layer of meaning, I guess, when like you had different characters choosing to actually be the performer on this thing, and compiling the stories that they had of their own experiences. So for example, one quite ironic thing was Archivo, Arquitectura y Diseño is owned by Fernando Romero and Sumaya Slim. Sumaya Slim is the daughter of Carlos Slim. Carlos Slim is one of the wealthiest men alive. He owns this big museum called Museo Sumaya in honor of her daughter, and the museum is in one of those neighborhoods. So while the gallery that they owned gave me money to support the building of this tricycle, once the tricycle went in the periphery of the museum, the police officers were telling Alejandro to not be around there, that he was not allowed to tricycle like around the museum, which is, it's an example of how Mexico City kind of works. The next project was Andamio. I should preface that like the design of these three projects were a prompt of my advisor. I mean, I'm still at school, so like all my work is like bounded by the limitations of academic research and of, having to pass a doctoral examination. So Andamio was a challenge to try to build something, an object that occupied space and that transformed space. And the networking comes from radio transmission, but I'll get into that. So Andamio started being not a scaffold. Andamio means scaffold, but it became really complicated, and the design that we had ended up looking like a scaffold. So then I was like, why don't we just use scaffold? Scaffold is ubiquitous and it's everywhere, and we should just try to do it. So we started experimenting with that and with materials. And this material, which is this colorful PVC plastic, is very ubiquitous in Mexico. It's also like what is used for these Acapulco chairs, which are like very famous, iconic 50s chairs that are coming back. And what's neat about that material is that it's very flexible and it's water and weatherproofed, and it's also like relevant to Mexico. So one of my premises for trying to design playscapes is that they have to be locally relevant, that the iconography should be locally relevant to the people that they're serving, and that they should be built grounds up, and that they do not need to be something gigantic or something that's necessarily top down, from government down or site specific, but that it can actually be something that emerges, that they do not need to be permanent, and hopefully eventually that they can take on account the changes of stations, weather, et cetera, to actually like be morphed with that and illustrated. All this was very much inspired by Aldo van Eyck, who built over 700 playgrounds in his native Amsterdam, and there was a political faction about this. Like playgrounds were seen as spaces for community generating and bringing together in a post-war divided cities. In Mexico City, as I said, it was mostly marginalization, segregation, what we have right now. So everywhere that I'm working, I'm trying to connect to neighborhoods that are somewhat far away, so close, divided by what they called city scars, these avenues that totally divide the place up. So we started weaving and weaving and weaving and getting bigger and bigger. And I worked with Sofia, who's an industrial designer who was super helpful, and David Craner, electrical engineer. We had a pretty good hang, like just building this and hanging out and testing it out. And so woven within the PVC plastic, there is this thing called electroluminescent wire. It's ready-made, you can buy it anywhere, but like it has this very nice glow about it. And I was interested in bringing light into the thing because, light usually beacons security and safety, and it can extend the life of a space beyond normal hours and bring into the nighttime. Yeah, that's fine. So we built two structures. There is electroluminescent wire, and also woven between it is conductive rubber, which also looks very much like the PVC. So part of the purpose was to make it digital without it looking digital, right? Like without having an interface. Every time I say network playscapes, people think that I'm interested in putting screens and buttons in the public space that are networks, but that's not it. You know, I'm interested in basically physical computing and the ubiquitousness of computing, and like in trying to degloss what a computer is, you know, like think of a computer not as a screen and a mouse and a keyboard, but actually like computational power and embedded in the everyday. So basically these two scaffolds are networked through radio. So when somebody's climbing on one, the other one starts lighting up where that person in this one is climbing at. So then the problem was where to place it. Initially, these were going to be outside a metro subway station, two identical plazas that serve two different neighborhoods. But bureaucracy just killed us all after many, many meetings and permits and security issues, et cetera, like it was just not going to happen. And I had a time limit, so I was like, I'm just going to do it as the premise goes, you know, just put it out there and see what happens and just deal with the consequences rather than ask for permission. So I went to the plaza where I initially had bought the tricycles. Since I had been working in that plaza, I kind of had built some cachet within the place, you know, like they knew that I was coming around all the time. So I went back and I talked to this guy who's like a very prominent figure within this plaza. It's called Plaza La Aguilita. Plaza La Aguilita up until the 80s was like the crack, cocaine, and prostitution shopping mall of Mexico City. So it has a very like tenuous relationship with government. Government kind of doesn't get in there because they know that they're not welcomed. So they are very self-governed, which is kind of nice. So in that sense, I skipped government altogether and I just went directly to them. And this guy told me like, okay, you know, I'm game for you to trying to do this, but this plaza is not mine. So what you have to do is go to every seller around the plaza and ask them for permission. So that was an interesting community approach, you know, because usually when people do public art, I feel that they go to one institution that then like links them to the head of that community, you know, and it's kind of always mediated, and it's hard to evaluate what you're doing when you're an outsider or when you have like some person mediating what the relationship is, and first of all defining what community actually is. So yeah, I went person by person, you know, with a presentation and showing them, and after I got approval from everybody, I decided to go on with it. Also because I needed their help. I wanted them to feel that this was also, you know, it was not meant for them, like it was not designed specifically for that plaza, it was designed for any plaza. But since it was going to live there, I was interested in them caring for it, for better or for worse, or adopting it, or saying, you know, like knowing that I had their approval. It was not easy to set up. I basically had all the help that I could gather myself, which was my boyfriend and a friend that flew in. But it was a pretty, you know, it was a big scaffold, and it was tough to put in because the pressure that was exerted by the weaving made it so that, you know, like it condensed it in, so expanding it back out was not an easy task and required a bunch of strength. You know, but that's the thing about working in the public space, you know, it went from 3 people to a bunch of people just living what they were doing, the merchandise that they were selling, et cetera, in order to come and help out install it, and help out make it a real thing. It was nice that while I went to pick up the other scaffold, this one was not even secured to the ground, and people were already, children mostly, climbing into it. They just parked their tricycles and decided to go on for it. And also part of the PVC was bought right around the corner. It's the only place where you can buy that PVC. It's around the corner from that plaza. So everybody there is quite acquainted with it. So the children had no issues on weaving parts that they thought were better, like having handrails, et cetera. So it was a really nice act of appropriation that made me really happy. It was funny because when I came back the next day, my boyfriend was like terrorized by the fact that this had happened, while I was super happy that it had happened. Like for me, it meant it fulfilled its objective of making it theirs and not mine. And it was crazy. It lasted for a week, and yeah, children were pretty happy with it. And the other thing that was really nice was that it was not only children. At night, it kind of became a chillaxing place for adults, because I also believe that when you're designing these things, I mean, while as maybe you can make them child-centered, they should not just be exclusively child-centered, and they should kind of blend with the architecture and not just be an imposition on the space itself. And also the iconography of the design, like I think that it has to be flexible enough that it can appropriate not only the physical motor that usually playgrounds do, but also the imaginative. So interviewing kids afterwards, you know, they were saying that they wanted to explore every color or go through every color, which I don't know what that means. Another kid was telling me that it was, you know, it was his house and that this is where the bedroom was and this is where the kitchen was and this is, you know, then it became the spaceship, you know, it had the variety that I was aiming for, which was sweet. And then going afterwards, like basically a month afterwards, just to see the memory that this had left, it was nice to see people recollecting images and drawing what they remembered this to be. And then the third project is Listen Tree. It's a project that I made with Gershon Dublin. How am I on time?
I think we are way over time.
Oh, really? Shite. Okay, then I'll just show a video. Oh, what the hell? Oh, that's sad. So basically this is what you see when you see Listen Tree. It's like you don't really see anything, you just see people hugging a tree. This project was supposed to connect the forest of Aragon, which is next to a slum and to the airport, and the forest of Chapultepec, which is a really posh forest. It's not really a forest, it's a park in Mexico City where the presidential house is and all the major museums. So what's happening with Listen Tree is that we have screwed a bone conducting transducer and adapted a screw that goes through metal and through wood, and we dig underground and we screw it on the base of the tree. So we take the fact that the tree is wood and water, so it's a really good conductor for sound, and we pipe in sounds from the other forest to this forest. So they kind of become these imaginative beacons for communication across distance, and that's that. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, unfortunately we are way over time, but we also started a bit late, so I think it's okay. I don't know if someone of the organizers is here, if we still have time for one or two questions or not. Is there any pressing question from the side of the audience, maybe? I don't know if it's okay to ask two questions still. Are we having a panel immediately afterwards? There's a coffee break. So let me just put two questions, if it's okay for everybody. Maybe a question to you first. My experience was I did a solo show with Rafael Lozano Hemmer, Mexican-Canadian artist, and from what I learned from his outdoor pieces is that in Mexico it's also super important that the people have, you know, that their voice is heard and that they have a platform, you know, to be outspoken. That's what I really liked about the bicycle project. So maybe you could say something on that issue.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I didn't do it with that intention. I mean, when I was thinking about network playscapes, it was not thought about a place for personal expression that was going to be translated into words and actually be readable, but it was a very satisfying project in that sense. I mean, I think that expression comes in many different ways and forms, like, you know, like spoken and voice is just one. But I want to think that a playground itself is a place for expression and for your own actuality to be heard. I mean, I think that you need places for expression because they are somewhat taking them away, right? And I mean, one of the things that they're planning for downtown Mexico City for the Zócalo sounds really pretty, which is turning it into a garden. But like once you turn it into a garden, you're saying that there cannot be any more protest in that space and that you cannot gather. So, I mean, as much as, you know, it's conflicting. So part of my call for making spaces for play in that sense is like trying to bring the best of digital play, you know, because it is like mediated with technologies and it's usually happening indoors and it no longer is free because it's mediated through a screen, which implies having the technology, et cetera, is to try to bring that out back into the public space and to have like places for gathering, which I think it's as important as it's a place for expression.
Thank you. And Felicie, one question to you. Something that came up my mind when I saw your works is the notion of the sublime, if that is an important concept for you, and would be interesting to hear. I mean, especially the last project is kind of really, you know, large-scale urban interventions, how you are handling the production of such huge pieces and works.
It's a bit strange because it's the only. They asked me to make the program, but you're talking about the production of the piece. The LED were supplied by the company. So the creator asked me I arrived in the project to find a good program because they were a bit afraid of those LED on that kind of support in the city. So we made the programmation, but the physical part, I didn't make it. I mean, it was already installed by the city. And they were afraid of a kind of programmation with many colors and something that has no meaning for the 50 years. So it's one of my only pieces I didn't make like the physical production. But it was a huge setup. I follow it, but... So it's the only sculpture I didn't really design. That's why it's also like I'm not totally agree with the way they made the matrix and with the LED. So in some way it's interesting that you ask me because on all the other projects it's lots of work, but this one it was much more about the programmation.
Well, thank you, the both of you, for your inspiring presentations. Looking forward to hear and see more in the future, and thank you for staying with us all that time. Thank you.